there were certain individuals that said before the season there was a chance that the Indianapolis Colts could be serious contenders for Super Bowl 50. Now, looking back, you can sit there and laugh at that, and you could balk at that assertion, but hey, I say this. This was a team that over the previous 3 years had made it to the playoffs each year, and each year had made a natural progression. 2012, they made the playoffs, lost in the wild card round. 2013 season, they made it to the playoffs. They beat the Chiefs in the wild card round. Then they got steamrolled in the divisional round. Then the year after that, they make it all the way through to the AFC Championship game before they got steamrolled by the New England Patriots. So, from a progression and logical standpoint, you would sit there and make a good argument, I think, and I thought I did at that time, as flawed and wrong as it frankly was. This was a Colts team that could do some damage. Now, surely you'll have those that sit there and are like, I knew this was coming, I knew this was going to happen all along, these Colts weren't that good, they were joking, da-da-da. Ah, shut up. Because even if you thought that they weren't going to have a great year and that they weren't real contenders, you probably still were more likely than not, sure you'll have those exceptions, but more likely than not, we're still picking the Colts to at least win the AFC South because that division stinks. And you're thinking to yourself that that's what's going to happen. So, it's surprising to see the way that this season played out and the fact that this team finished 8-8, didn't win the AFC South, finished second behind the Houston Texans, and they're sitting there with the 18th overall pick of the 2016 NFL Draft. So you could argue that not a lot went well for this team throughout the course of the season. And to be fair, not a lot really went right. Not a lot really was good. There were some positives. You got to try and find some positives for teams. If I've had positives for teams that had top 5 or top 10 picks in this draft, I got to come up with some for a team that finished 8-8. I'll go to the offensive side of the ball, and I'll look at T.Y. Hilton and Dante Moncrief. T.Y. Hilton, I thought, came alive a little bit the second half of the year. He went over 1,000 yards receiving again. Dante Moncrief, the third-round pick from 2014 out of Ole Miss, I thought he showed some nice progression in the first half of the season. He was, frankly, the most reliable and consistent option that this team had in the passing game. So it's a nice 1-2 combination to build off of in the future, especially if you ever get anything out of Philip Dorsett. You will still have a nice, young, explosive wide receiving core that could really wreak havoc in the future on opposing defenses. On the defensive side of the ball, I'll go to the defensive line, and I'll look at guys like third-round pick Henry Anderson out of the 2015 draft and fifth-round pick out of that same draft, David Perry. Those are a couple of guys that I thought came in and during their time showed themselves really, really well. Anderson was playing really, really good. I thought Perry played pretty well as well, considering his draft position. Those are two young building blocks potentially on that defensive line for a Colts defense that is really, really old. That's important. So I thought those guys made a good showing for themselves. This was a team, even with the season not going incredibly well, still found a way to finish with a winning record in the AFC South. They did go 4-2 in the division. They beat the Denver Broncos. That was a point in time when you're looking at that moment in time. Once they had beaten the Denver Broncos, you're like, hey, maybe things will start to rebound and maybe things will start to turn around. And they just didn't for a multitude of reasons. They were much more competitive against the New England Patriots, and frankly, if it wasn't for some ridiculous decision-making by Chuck Pagano, perhaps may I argue that this Colts team would have been able to beat the New England Patriots. And they were also very competitive against the Carolina Panthers in the sense that they play like shit in the rain. Then the fourth quarter comes, and Andrew Luck and that offense comes to life. They force the Panthers to overtime, and for a lot of intents and purposes, they maybe should have won that damn game. And, so you look at it, if they would have figured out a way to finish the job against the Carolina Panthers, and they would have figured out a way to not shoot themselves in the foot and beat the New England Patriots. This is a team that goes 10-6. This is a team that wins their division, makes it to the playoffs. And once you make it to the playoffs, who knows what the hell can happen? So they weren't that far away, but they were a lot farther away than I would have anticipated them being because a lot didn't go right this year. Got to start off with Andrew Luck. The start of the season, when he was healthy, he played like shit, frankly. He was making terrible decisions. He was, forcing the ball, just making bad reads. He was bad. His accuracy was shit. He would have that occasional flash of where he looked like he was okay, but other than that, he was really, really bad. And then, of course, he got hurt, got that lacerated kidney, and he missed pretty much the second half of the season. So the guy that you've invested a ton of money in, your number 1 overall pick for 2012, your franchise player, misses half of the year. A lot of organizations are going to have trouble overcoming that, and the Colts most certainly did. Their big spending spree for veterans and free agency didn't really go well. Frank Gore was okay, but not great. Didn't reach 1,000 yards for the season. Went an entire season without a single 100-yard rushing game. Andre Johnson looked done. Trent Cole looked done as well. These were guys that we pointed to and said, hey, they're bringing in veterans. They're bringing in leadership, man. This is going to help the Colts turn a corner. It didn't help them turn shit, frankly. I mean, offensively, what's so sad about this is for all the high picks they've spent on skill position players over the past several years, this was a team that in 7 games scored 20 points or less. And you can point some of that to the fact that when Hasselbeck was in the game or somebody else was starting at quarterback, they had a different dynamic to them. And sure, that's part of it too, but this was just not a good offensive football team throughout the extended period of 2015. 7 games with 20 points or less score is just not going to get it done. And you look at them offensively, they were 24th in the league in points scored, 28th in yards. This was a team that consistently struggled to move the football, shot themselves in the foot with a lot of turnovers, especially when Andrew Luck was on the field behind center, and struggled to score points. And then defensively, they were 25th in points allowed, 26th in total yardage allowed. Frankly, I'm surprised they even finished the season 8-8. I really am. Because at no point in time did this look like an impressive team. At no point in time, even like the victory against Denver, you're like, yeah, that's okay. Like I said, they did look competitive against some other teams, but they never really impressed you. They didn't sit there and make you say, wow, okay, this is the moment in time. They'll figure it out. They'll get it right. Because even when they started off the season, losing the first 2 games, they barely beat Tennessee in week number 3. I mean, barely. They got by the skin of their teeth. They lost the AFC South. They got blown out by the fucking Jacksonville Jaguars, 51-16, for God's sakes, at a time in the season where they were supposed to be coming together and figuring it out and getting hot and trying to still win that division. They were in a position to win it, and then they lose 51-16 to the fucking Jacksonville Jaguars, for Christ's sakes. How the hell did the Indianapolis Colts miss the playoffs this year? Not win that division is astounding. And then they went 1-3 against the AFC East. 1-3. That was not that good of a division. You had 2 teams that were really good, 2 teams that weren't. Buffalo beat, I'm trying to think of who they actually beat. Was it the Dolphins? I think it was the Dolphins. Yeah, 1-3 against the AFC East. Not going to get the job done, brother. Just not going to get the job done. And then even in their victories, 7 of their 8 wins came by 7 points or less. So frankly, if certain breaks would have went a different way and they didn't have some of that experience to be able to win those close games, they didn't get some lucky bounces, this is a team that might have went 3-13 or 4-12. And when you look back at the way the season played out and the construction of this team, I'm frankly surprised that they didn't. In terms of this offseason, this is a critical moment in time for this Indianapolis Colts organization. You know what this kind of reminds me of a little bit? It reminds me of that 2001 Indianapolis Colts team with Peyton Manning. It was his 4th year as quarterback. You'll remember that season for the San Francisco 49ers game where Peyton Manning threw, I think, like 4 interceptions. And that, of course, is where we got that legendary Jim Moore. Playoffs? Playoffs? Are you kidding me? We'll be lucky to win another game. And they didn't win another game the rest of the year. This reminds me of that moment in time. And it was interesting, after that 2001 season, a lot of things changed. Tony Dungy was brought in, Dwight Freeney was taken in the 1st round, and there was a process that was begun to slowly try to balance out that team and make it more than the Peyton Manning show. And eventually, a few years down the road, they got it finally right. The formula worked, and they won Super Bowl 41. And then a couple years later, made it to another Super Bowl. What are the Colts going to do here? Because they've reached that kind of pivotal, seminal moment in the career of Andrew Luck and in this moment of time for this organization. Well, you would have thought, based off of what had happened and the word and the rumors that had happened throughout the course of the season, that one or both of Ryan Grigson, the general manager, and Chuck Pagano were going to be gone. But surprisingly, not only did both of them not get fired, or one of them even get fired, both of them were retained and both of them were extended. Now, I understand the frustration for a lot of Colts fans, because if I was a Colts fan initially, I would probably be flummoxed by this too. I'd be like, what in the hell did Grigson do long-term that was so great that makes you have to keep him? And frankly, based off of what transpired this year, what did Chuck Pagano do that was so great that makes you want to keep him either? That's a fair question. And I can sit there and say there's something to be said about continuity in the organization. Maybe these guys realized that they weren't as good as they thought they were without the other helping them. And maybe there's something to that. Maybe Irsay stepped in and slipped them some Mickeys in their drinks or gave them the stickiest of the icky, and they smoked the peace pipe, and everybody's all kumbaya and fucks. Is it a potential where this could continue to rear its ugly head and it ends up being a blow-up moment and a disaster for this organization? Perhaps. But this could also be the seminal moment where things were made right and things turn around. And, this could be something we look back on as a key moment in the history of this Colts organization as a positive, too. I mean, it's fascinating to me, that's for sure. I don't know that it was the right move, but I'm not willing to fully commit to saying that this was stupid or this was bad because I can understand it. But now that you know that the head coach is going to be in place likely for the next few years, the general manager is going to be in place for the next few years, they've got two major priorities this offseason and going forward. They need to improve the protection for Andrew Luck, and they need to get younger on defense. Think about this defensive unit for the Indianapolis Colts. And as I was preparing to do this video, I knew the defense was a little aged. I didn't realize just how aged they were. All of these guys that I'm going to name off are either starters in 2015 or possible starters in 2016. All guys that will be 30 or older come 2016. Kendall Langford, Robert Mathis, DeQuell Jackson, Eric Walden, Jarrell Freeman, Greg Toller, Mike Adams, Dwight Lowry, Arthur Jones. I mean, those are 9 different guys right there. That's a lot of age on a bad defensive unit. So that means you're overpaying several of these guys for very, very limited production. This team desperately, badly needs to improve their youth, talent, and depth on the defensive side of the ball in a big hurry. Now, people will point to the selection of Philip Dorsett in the first round and be like, why would you take a luxury pick like wide receiver? Now, here's my thing. I get why people would say that, but these are the same people that will sit there and at the same time go with you. You got to take best player available, but then you'll knock a team if a team feels that that guy was the best player available on the board. If they thought Philip Dorsett was the best player available on the board, then that's the guy that they should have taken. Would that have been the guy that I would have necessarily taken for them? Perhaps not. Well, that's the guy that they took. Based off of where they were at in their situation, I probably would have taken a Stephon Anthony or a Landon Collins. I think either one of those guys would have made more sense long-term for the organization. And again, similar player ratings between them and a Philip Dorsett. So I'm going to go away from the luxury pick. I'm going to go with the best available player at a more true position of need because, again, they were all very similar on the board. So the tiebreaker goes to the bigger need in that case. That, to me, would have been the way to go. But even if they would have done that, it still doesn't fix the problem of the age at all 3 levels of this defense. I mean, this defense is old and not very good and lacking in depth in several areas. So that one pick alone is not going to fix it. And this in part comes to, frankly, Grigson trading away a first-round pick for Trent Richardson. I mean, that busted out, and you don't have that first-round pick that you could have spent on the defensive side of the ball. And when they did spend a first-round pick on the defensive side of the ball in 2013, they spent it on Bjorn Werner any damn ways. A guy who clearly, to me, wasn't a fit for the 3-4 defense. So why the fuck did you take him? So even with this front office, this scouting department has attempted to address the defensive side of the ball in the first round. It hasn't gone well. So it makes you think they'd get it right in 2015 anyways. But nonetheless, they've got to improve Andrew Luck's protection, and they've got to get younger, more athletic, and more depth on the defensive side of the ball. In terms of the defensive side of the ball, they need help outside at the linebacker position in the 3-4. They need edge rushers. Werner's a bust. Walden's getting up there in age. Mathis is not the same player he once was. Could be a productive role player, but how much do you really want to pay a productive role player at this point in time? They need multiple young edge rushers on the outside. They really do. Unfortunately for the Colts, this is not a great, tremendous class for edge rushers in terms of 3-4 outside linebackers, at least in my opinion. They need help in that secondary really, really badly. The one good thing about getting guys like Henry Anderson, whenever he comes back from his ACL injury in 2016, and then David Perry as well, is that you've got 2 young building blocks on that defensive line in that 3-4. So that's not bad. That's not as big of a need. But that secondary, you saw it. Even if Toller was healthy, they weren't very good. And once he wasn't healthy, they were worse. They were terrible outside of Vontae Davis, and it affected Vontae Davis too. I mean, they need depth at corner in a bad, bad way. They really didn't get anything out of DeJuan Smith, their 3rd-round pick from this past draft. But even if they would have, they still would need more out of him. And they could use some young depth at safety. No more Mike Adams and Dwight Lowery's. They need difference makers. They need a physical in the box, strong safety, a center fielding, playmaking, free safety. Basically, I guess to go ahead and say they could use some youth and depth at the inside linebacker position. If it's a defensive player, they fucking need it at this point. But the problem is they have needs on the offensive side of the ball too. They could use major upgrades at center and right guard. They could use a young running back as well. I mean, this is a team with needs all over the place. And as I was evaluating this and I was getting this video piece together, I was astounded by the lack of depth that this team actually had, the age on the defensive side of the ball, and just how many needs they had. For a team that just got done making the playoffs 3 straight years, 2015 in the aftermath has exposed to me just how much of smoke and mirrors that really was. And it really exposed to me just how truly far away this organization is from being a viable championship contender. And this 2016 NFL draft is going to be critical for this organization. They must get multiple immediate impact players on the defensive side of the ball, or it's all going to be for now.